So a longtime viewer of the channel writes in and asks a question about how to read and understand a particular passage from the Bible. He writes, "Dear B-Dub, in Luke 17:3, Jesus says, 'Be on your guard. If your brother sins, rebuke him, and if he repents, forgive him.' Does this mean that if my brother does not repent, that I don't have to forgive him?" Well, that's a great question, and it's exactly the kind of question that we can answer by applying a little bit of logic and a little bit of common sense. So Jesus' instructions are pretty simple, pretty straightforward. If my brother sins against me and repents, then I'm supposed to forgive him. The question here, though, what happens if my brother sins against me and does not repent? Does that mean I don't need to forgive him? Well, let's answer that first by applying a little bit of logic. We can create a very simple deductive argument to capture what Jesus is saying and what's going on here. So let's go ahead and start with what Jesus is commanding in this passage, and we'll make that premise one of a deductive argument. Premise one, if my brother repents, that's the antecedent, then I must forgive him. That's the consequent. Well, let's make premise two the fact of the matter about what happens. In this case, we'll start with my brother repents. So premise two, my brother does repent. Now we have two premises, and we can easily see that if those two premises are true, then the conclusion is logically inescapable: I must forgive him. Well, if you've had any training in logic, you might recognize this as one of the standard deductive forms that's valid. We even have a name for it. It's called the modus ponens. But the point is that any reasoning that follows this structure is similarly valid. So if the premises are true, the conclusion must be true. Okay, so that's easy enough to understand. But the question here is about the case in which my brother does not repent. And it's possible that somebody might use a similar structure of reasoning, but different in important ways. Somebody might start with Jesus' command, something like this. Okay, well, premise one, Jesus says, if my brother repents, then I must forgive him. Premise two, my brother does not repent. And so somebody could put those two together and try to conclude something like this. Conclusion, therefore, I do not have to forgive him. And the question we're asking here is this a legitimate conclusion? Well, the answer, of course, is no. It's not a legitimate conclusion. And this kind of reasoning actually commits one of the most common deductive fallacies that there are. It's called the fallacy of denying the antecedent. It gets that name because the second premise denies the truth of the antecedent in the hypothetical statement in premise one. But in this case, you don't even need to know that specialized terminology, and you certainly don't need any special training in logic to see what's going on here. All we need to use is our common sense, and let's pay very close attention to what Jesus is actually saying in this passage. Jesus says, if your brother sins against you, and if he repents, then I must forgive him. Notice that Jesus doesn't say a word about what's expected of me in the case in which my brother sins against me and does not repent. So it would be logically fallacious to try to conclude something about that case, what I'm supposed to do when my brother does not repent, from a passage that's about what I'm supposed to do when my brother does repent. Maybe there are some other teachings of Jesus or some other passages in the Bible that tell me what's expected of me whenever my brother sins against me and doesn't repent, and so maybe I need to go look at those. But it's very easy to see what this passage means when we apply a little bit of common sense and a little bit of logic. And when we do that, we can avoid mistakes both interpreting what the passage says and means and in applying the passage to our lives. All right, that's it. We'll see you next time.
Almost forgot to tell you, like, share, and subscribe.